What if I told you that the first debt crisis did not start with banks, credit cards, or Wall Street, but with farmers losing their land, their freedom, and sometimes their lives? Picture this. You wake up one morning in ancient Greece. No stock market. No central bank. No IMF. Yet somehow people are drowning in debt so severe that entire cities are on the brink of collapse. Sound familiar? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Debt crises are not modern accidents. They are ancient design flaws. And the very first one did not just reshape Greece. It quietly revealed how power actually works. Today, we are going back nearly 3,000 years to uncover the first recorded debt crisis in history. Not as a history lesson, but as a warning. Because once you understand how this crisis began, you start seeing echoes everywhere. Let us start with the claim. The first debt crisis in history was not caused by laziness, bad harvests, or moral failure. It was caused by a system that quietly concentrated power while appearing fair. Ancient Greece, especially Athens in the 7th century BCE, was built on agriculture. Land meant survival, and survival meant borrowing. Farmers borrowed seed, tools, and food during bad seasons. The interest rates were brutal, often 20 to 30%. Miss a payment, and something extraordinary happened. You did not just lose your land. You became collateral. Yes, human collateral. Debtors could be enslaved. Their children could be sold. Their bodies marked with stones to show ownership. This was not chaos. This was legal. And here is the disturbing part. Most people did not see it as a crisis at first. That is how debt works best. Quick question: if the rules are legal, does that make them fair? Hold on to that thought. Now let us break down the system that made this possible. Ancient Athens had no paper money. No coins at first. Value was measured in grain, livestock, and land. Credit existed long before currency. The wealthy elite, known as the Eupatridae, owned most of the land. They also controlled the courts, and conveniently, they controlled the rules of debt. Loans were backed by land and labor. This system was called debt bondage. Here is how it worked. A farmer borrows grain to survive a bad year. The harvest fails again. Interest compounds. The farmer defaults. The creditor seizes the land. The farmer stays on it as a worker. Miss another obligation and the farmer becomes enslaved. This is not a metaphor. This is the foundation of early Greek inequality. And the system rewarded one thing above all else: control. And once control becomes embedded in law, it stops looking like oppression. It starts looking like tradition. Let us talk about control. Debt in ancient Greece was not just economic. It was social, political, psychological. Debt contracts were enforced by aristocratic courts. Judges were landowners. Lawmakers were creditors. Conflict of interest? Absolutely. But here is the genius of the system. It framed debt as personal failure. If you lost your land, it was because you borrowed. If you lost your freedom, it was because you failed, not because the system was predatory. This narrative did something powerful. It kept rebellion fragmented. People blamed themselves instead of the structure. Sound familiar? Also, imagine explaining compound interest to someone who has never heard of numbers beyond counting sheep. Not great odds. As debt expanded, so did inequality. Large estates swallowed small farms. Free citizens became servants. Athens was slowly turning into a city with extreme wealth at the top and desperation below. And here is the critical moment. The people noticed. Not all at once, but enough to become dangerous. Farmers began abandoning land. Some fled the city. Others talked about revolution. Athens was heading towards civil war. And that is when the elites realized something terrifying. They might lose everything. So they made a move that would change history. Enter Solon, a poet, a statesman, a mediator. Solon was appointed to fix the crisis. But here is the tension. If he sided with the poor, the elites would revolt. If he sided with the elites, the people would burn the city. So Solon did something radical. He canceled debts. Not partially, completely. This reform was called Seisachtheia, meaning the shaking off of burdens. Debt slavery was abolished. Enslaved Athenians were freed. Land markers were removed. For the first time, debt was separated from human bondage. Sounds like a happy ending, right? Not quite, because solving a crisis does not erase its logic. It just changes its form. Solon saved Athens from collapse. But he did not dismantle elite power. Land stayed concentrated. Political influence stayed restricted. Economic pressure remained. Debt was forgiven, but inequality survived. And here is the lesson. Debt crises are not accidents. They are pressure valves. They release just enough tension to keep the system alive. Ancient Greece did not eliminate exploitation. It refined it. Later empires learned this lesson very well. Rome, medieval Europe, modern finance, different tools. Same logic. Which raises a dangerous question. What happens when debt can no longer be cancelled? In ancient Athens, debt had limits. It could trigger revolt. Today, debt is abstract, digital, invisible. You do not see the chains. You feel them. And unlike ancient farmers, modern debtors cannot flee the city. The system is global. That should make you uncomfortable. Because the first debt crisis taught us this. When debt becomes a tool of control, society fractures. When inequality grows unchecked, reform becomes inevitable. Or collapse does. History does not repeat. But it rhymes loudly. So next time someone says debt is just numbers, ask them this. Since when have numbers ever been neutral? The first debt crisis in history was not just about money. It was about power disguised as obligation. Ancient Greece showed us how easily credit becomes control. How laws protect systems, not people. And how reform only comes when pressure becomes unbearable. This is not ancient history. It is a blueprint. If this story made you rethink debt, power, and control, do not stop here. On your screen is another video where we go even deeper into the first debt crisis in history, uncovering details most textbooks ignore. Click it now. History gets a lot more uncomfortable from here.